Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Hello, welcome back to Fighting on Film. Now this week we are joined by director and author Tom Petch to talk about his 2013 film, The Patrol, which was the first British feature film to tackle the war in Afghanistan from the British perspective. Tom, it's great to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be on the show. I'm a big fan of the show. I really enjoy it. Yeah.
Oh, it's brilliant. Thank you. And, again, thanks for coming on to talk about your film, because as it is very rare to talk about a director about their movie. And before we go on, if you haven't seen this film, folks, it's available on Amazon Prime. You can buy it on DVD, Blu-ray, and it's really worth your time. So, as we usually do, I'll cover production or Matt will cover cast or however do it. But this week, as we have you here, Tom, it would be amiss to not get you to run through how did the film come about, like the production of it. Please regale us.
That's a story. So it must have started. I looked at the first draft script, which was November 2009. So there you go. And the Afghan war had rolled into the NATO deployment, so British troops were in Helmand, and things had come off the rails a bit, and it was obvious to me that probably the Taliban were going to win. In fact, I think quite a few people sort of realised this policy wasn't working. And a mate of mine, he rang me up. He's another veteran like me, so I was obviously in the army, left 97. And he rang me up after a bit of a sleepless night. Said, "Tom, we got to do something. We've got to buy these guys helicopters, because a lot of the casualties were coming about because they're moving by roads, and the Taliban could target people using IEDs." And I just sat thinking, helicopters, like how are you gonna start a charity doing helicopters? I think this is before Help for Heroes had come in, which was, that whole charity initiative came around, and that was actually a bit of a sticking plaster because it didn't really solve what was going on the ground. But anyway, so I went away, thought about it, thought, you know what, I'm in the film industry. I've been in the film industry since 97. I've made some films myself. They were short films and TV commercials. I thought I could write a script. And I'd actually, by that stage, I think I'd sold 2 scripts, neither of which got made. And I thought, I'm going to sit down and write it. And I sat down and write it. And obviously, with my sort of producer head on, when I was writing, I thought, we're probably not going to have a lot of money here. This is going to be a low budget thing. So I sort of wrote with that in mind. And I could mention a couple of things. Battle of Algiers, which is a film I love, which is a black and white war movie. Yeah. Absolutely love that. There was actually more. There was a play and a film called The Long, the Short, and the Tall. So the idea you just get a really small unit, really simple story, and try and portray some of the truth. Obviously, it's not a true story; it's a fictional unit, fictional deployment, all of that. But try and portray some of the truth of what it is to be in those situations. And then fast forward to the following year, I ran it past quite a few people, I think including the BBC, who went on to do Our Girl, which was their take on the Afghan war. And nobody picked it up. I mean, I think at some point somebody said, "Tom, it's an anti-war movie about Afghanistan." In this moment, nobody's going to take a punt on that. And I then thought, well, I've got production coming. We could do it ourselves, and that's basically what we did. Went into production, shot it in 3 weeks. The crew came with me. I think they figured, Tom's going to the desert 3 weeks. I said, look, we're going to the desert 3 weeks for shoot a movie. I promise you, you're not going to get paid. You might get paid if we make some money there. We never did. But anyway, they call it deferment in the independent, which is the never of filmmaking. So, we went out of the desert. I mean, one of the actual amazing things about production is I'd started in the film industry as a location manager. And to really pull it off in Morocco, what we needed was somewhere we could base ourselves in the desert and shoot at the same time. And I through a friend of mine who did big movies, like he did all the Star Wars and stuff and the big, epic sandals movies out there. He put me in touch with a guy called James Cutting, who sadly died recently. He was a fixer based out of Marrakesh. He said, "What are you after?" I said, "Ideally an oasis with some accommodation and a ruined village." He said, "There's a place I remember like that out in the desert, me and him and the woman who became my wife, we drove out to the desert looking for this place. She actually spotted it from the back of the Jeep because we were looking the wrong way. So is it that down that valley?" And what it was a Frenchman had started an eco lodge out there in an extra Berber settlement. And the Berbers had been, Moroccan history, a bit complicated, but anyway, they'd been moved on. And that's what the compound was and everything in the movie. It was, right. And when we brought a couple of Afghan vets out, they went, "Bloody hell, this looks like Afghanistan." And we shot in August. Ramadan, because it was closed. It was closed except for one guest who was really weird. When we arrived, Prince was there in the Eco Lodge with his band. And one of his real experiences arriving there to start the filming, I was going to run in the desert and I ran past Prince and a woman on a camel in the desert. Or the artist formerly known as Prince. So that's kind of how we got off the ground. What else can I talk about production? Can I ask me some questions? Because I don't know what I've done there.
So you said about budget, like what I couldn't find anything online about a budget. Like what money were you playing with to get the film
made? We had cash, 250,000, which is nothing for making a film. I mean, we had one investor who got behind us and stuck with us. Is a really great guy. Who I don't know how, from networking thing I found him. I put my own money into it. I used that thing, don't do this at home, people, but I did that thing they did in Clark. You know the movie Clerks, where they roll one credit card onto another? So I ran up one credit, I maxed it out, ran out. Sorry, Barclays and all the rest of you, but that's what I did. And then eventually I ended up with a satellite credit card. That's how we got the helicopter out there. There was a point where my producer, Tom Stewart, he's a great guy, said, Tom, we've got to stop production. We've run out of money. I said, we're never going to stop shooting. We'll just keep shooting. We'll be all right. And that's how we got through it. So it was a kind of wing and a prayer. And there were people I got to shout out to, like On Site, who I'd done a lot of post-production with. They came on board to finish it. My long-suffering and best mate, Luke Devil, who was the editor, who has stuck with me through thick and thin, because it took us a long time to finish it. Because we came back and it took us, because we didn't have any cash, we then went into post-production. We had to go back to our day jobs to finish it, which is why we shot in 2011. We didn't come out till 2013, which is quite a long time.
Right. Yeah, because I remember when it came out, and I just couldn't watch it for a while, and then I noticed it come out on Amazon. So, did it have a theatrical release over here? Yeah,
and actually that's the problem that's changed now. With independent production, basically you've got a theatrical window, which is where you get the cinema release, and then they hold it for 3 months, and then you get the DVD and the online. Really, what you want as an independent producer, you want those two together. And we had a problem in that. The distributor went for it, Picture House and people picked it up. But we were only doing like 12 screens, so that wasn't really worth it. We had a lot of good press and stuff. And it would have been good if that had been compressed. I think that would have been really good for the audience to get that all out once. That happens more now. That whole model has changed since COVID.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Stuff drops at the same time.
Yeah, you could pay for your latest Marvel or go to the cinema, I think, pretty much. Yeah.
And you just missed the streaming boom by like maybe a year or two, I guess.
Yeah, we were ahead of that. We were DVD at Sainsbury's, which was
I think that's where I saw it initially. It used to be the port of call for the low budget war movie fan, where you would go and check the DVD.
That shelf by checkout.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Where Eagles Dare, the platoon together.
Yeah, exactly. I just thought I'd mention quickly the cinematography by Stuart Bentley. He worked on Black Mirror, This Is England 90, Top Boy, Our World War BBC series, and his work on the movie is absolutely top notch.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Really good stuff.
Amazing job. And we did a weird production thing, which is basically when you're shooting, you usually shoot a straight day, which can be a 10-hour day, a 12-hour day with a break at lunch. But because we're in the desert in August, the worst time to be shooting is the middle of the day because you get really strong overhead light. The magic hour happens at dawn and dusk. So what we did, because we were kind of our own band really, and living in an oasis, Stu and I decided we shoot morning, shoot evening. So we get up before dark, get out in the desert for sunrise, shoot, wrap up about 11, come back to this oasis, which had a pool, it was beautiful. Everyone chill out, have a bit of meze, do lunch, have a siesta, and then we go out again for 3 o'clock to pick up the magic hour. So our shooting day was always split, which is why we get that great light already. You've got that great light all the time, all backlit, natural light out in the desert. And it's a fantastic location to shoot.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, it looks huge. That's what I like about it. They feel really enclosed, and they feel like they're just this tiny little dot in this huge, massive space, and they could be ambushed at any moment. That's what I loved about it.
And that was my idea. Yeah, that was my idea about it. Was like, because a lot of these guys were going out to Africa when we were very young, like 19-year-olds, and I thought, well, basically, if you're 19, you come from North Norfolk, Bradford, wherever you've been deployed from, and you get shipped to Afghanistan. It's a bit like going to another planet. So that and the soundtrack, the soundtrack Nick Crofton done, Jones.
The soundtrack is phenomenal as well.
Yeah,
it was like the beginning of the film is amazing.
Yeah, that was it. It was kind of thought, those movies, trying to think of, it was a bit like, not really like Alien, but that feeling where you're just completely lost in another world. That was the kind of vibe we were going for with that cinematography and the music. Yeah.
Right. So maybe Matt, do you want to? I know you've got some things on the cast. Do you want to go through and see how we get on?
No. I think what I'd like to ask Tom next is, obviously we talked a bit about production there, but how did you get into filmmaking? I mean, obviously you're in the army and you got out in '97. So, I mean, what made you want to get into filmmaking when you came out of the army, and what's the background of when you were in the army that sort of fed into this film and the experience?
I think so. When I was in the army, the only film experience I had this really weird film experience in the army. They have in the army a film unit sort of set. Well, they have BFCS. They have their own broadcaster, and I was working as what's called an aide de camp. It was just after the Gulf War. To the commander of British Forces Cyprus, he said, "I want a Christmas film, Tom, Christmas film." And he'd written a script, which is basically him talking to camera, saying how hard it was that we couldn't go home for Christmas and what good job everyone's doing. And he wanted me to put pictures to it. And he said, "Look, I'm going to get you a crew from Nicosia, which was a Cypriot film crew, sound recorders, cameraman." And because I was working with the biggest man in the island, I could just pick up the phone to anybody I wanted. So I'd ring up Akatir and say, "You got any tornadoes landing?" You know, and I'd ring up the Army Recce Squad and say, can you get me some scout cars? Navy, get me a landing craft. And then I got a helicopter off him, and we flew around the island filming all this. And I just went, wow, this is a job. This is producing. I've got to look into this when I leave the army. And that was the sort of first, because nobody at school had told me there was something called filmmaking. Like, that was it. And I just thought, I'm going to look into it. And then when I left the army, I thought, oh, well, I asked around, and nobody really moved from the military into the film in my generation. Now there are tons. There are tons of people who've crossed over. And obviously you've probably spoken to some guys. Actually, you spoke to Jim Dowdle. He's older than me. Okay, there's one guy, but he was TA.
Yeah.
But like, I was the first of a couple of guys that moved across, and I rang up a mate of mine, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm on a film, but don't come down here. It's a porn movie. It's called Preaching to the Perverted." So I then, I'm not going to go and work on that set. And he gave me another number, which was a guy in Soho. And like you do, I walked into Soho, walked into an office, went up the steps, and there was a guy called Peter Scott, again, now sadly died. And that was the back end of the world when people like Ridley Scott, Alan Parker were just still making TV commercials. I was on the back end of that world, you know. So big budget. Film industry wasn't so great. This was 97, but we had a lot of big TV shoots, and that's what I got into. And I started working on those. That was my first.
Right. Well, in terms of cast, a cast can make or break a film. So, of course, a lot of the guys that you work with on the film are, I suppose, what you would call character actors. And what you would probably, when I was watching it, I thought to myself, these guys are probably a really good analog for all the character actors we saw in those classic 50s and 60s British war movies, where they're not huge roles. They're jobbing actors. They've done lots of work, but they're super good at what they're doing, and they bring a lot to each role. And that was the feel I got for this. So, when you were putting that cast together, what were you looking for, and how did it all come together?
Yeah, it was age was the first thing, really, because I wanted to, you can go, and that happens with stunt casting when you're going Brad Pitt, the rest of it, you're going older than the real guys. But I thought, no, we're going to go after the youngest. I think. I think the youngest guy was 19, I think we had. So it was really young. So the appropriate age. So we put out this casting brief. And then we just did a really heavy casting. Jeremy Zimmerman did it, good casting director who I've known for a few years, got loads of people in, went through it. And actually we cast someone, I can't remember his name, to play Smudge. And then he dropped out. He got cold feet on the project. And that's when we got Nav, who actually I thought was brilliant. He just stepped up.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's that kind of, I could see, because all these characters were basically supposed to be characters I kind of know of, or they're kind of like tropes, cliche from the military, So the Nav character is like the backroom lawyer, and mates of mine who'd been in the army, they went, yeah, I recognise that guy. And there's always one of those. Actually, there was one in Long, the Short, and the Tall. It's a similar character, the one who always questions everything. Yeah, regardless.
I forget the character's name, but it's exactly the same thing. Yeah.
And then Ben Wrighton obviously played the officer. I was kind of looking someone, I hate to say this, kind of looking someone who's a bit like me, kind of a bit young, like someone who's like a bit like, I know he was more, I hope Ben doesn't get excited. He was more like, he was actually posher, I think, more rugby than me. We looked at so it would definitely be kind of infantry officer material. And that was it, because I knew the characters well in my own head, in terms of what the real ones would look like. So that was the thing, just going through the casting. And Jeremy just got a load of people in, went through 3 or 4 castings and got those guys. Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
I really like the multinational, multiculturalness of the men, because that's much more of an accurate representation of the British Army now. I really appreciated that, and having Nav coming from a his background. I'm not sure if he's Muslim or if he's Sikh or what his
British
background
Asian
is.
London
British
sort of
Asian,
background,
yeah,
isn't
that's
it?
what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really. It's just those sorts of areas, the working class areas where people genuinely are recruited from or join up from. It felt really true, and that's just something that it's like it echoes like Nine Men. If you've seen it, or if you've listened to our episode on it, that little cross section of chaps feels very England 1940.
Yeah.
Like the men folk. This feels very 2006.
Yeah.
Makeup of Britain. I think that's a really strong element of it. But you didn't do what other movies might have done, which is really put it up forward. It's just there. It's just a thing.
Yeah.
That's what I think really is good about the casting. It's there.
No, but that didn't overplay. And also the other thing about that we didn't really go down that route is my day, a lot of Commonwealth soldiers came through, so a lot of Fijians, people like that. So you'd had like people like Nav or maybe West Indian background, like Nikki Bevan, who plays a sergeant. But I think if you go back a bit, the war movies are portraying the reality, which was you'd have white units, and then you'd have an Indian battalion, and the Indian battalion was completely Indian. So if you watch 1970, they mixed it up, and suddenly you got a guy in a turban in a Sikh in the middle of a truck with a bunch of guys, and they're in the wrong unit because that the Sikhs were in a separate unit. That's how it all worked back then. I just tried to represent what I'd experienced myself. I didn't, and actually the guy we had first in for casting for Nav's role was a white guy, so he was a working class. So I was like, whatever way it comes. Yeah. So I did like Nikki Bevan for the sergeant because I thought, kind of historically, I thought if you were like from West Indian background, being put in that position where this is your life, do you know what I mean? I don't know if that came across in the film, but there's a real this is your life.
He does talk about that.
This is the thing you've really built up to, and now spoiler, now you can have it trashed. It's like that was kind of a bit of a motivator for that character. Yeah.
I like how their outlook on things is challenged, but not through themselves. Through the plot and what's going on around them. I really enjoyed that. So maybe we should move on to the alley tally like we do.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
So, to lead off, did you have any obstacles with sourcing kit and equipment? Because obviously it's more modern gear. Is that harder to source?
Yeah, we didn't have problems sourcing. We had problems getting it into Morocco. So I think Libya war was either on or was winding up when we went out there. And the insurers were like going, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, we'll be one of the best armed units in the area. I said, we're going to have 2 Brownings and a load of AK. Yeah, we'll have some stuff with us. We might have to recommission it. But anyway, that's what I said to them jokingly. But actually getting it out into the country is really tough because Morocco is very, very strict. So basically there was a coup a long time ago in Morocco. So they're very strict and the government doesn't trust the army with weapons. So when you go there, it's handed into the gendarmes who then lock it up every night. And you literally wait for the gendarmes to hand it out to the army in the morning to get your weapons out. And we had a bit of a problem to start with, which was that DHL, bless them, broke the containers in Heathrow Airport. So we lost the weapon shipment. Tom Stewart was down there at the airport to sign over all the weapons. They didn't show up. Rang me up when I was up in the desert. He said, no weapons, Tom, what are we going to do? So we started shooting 2 days later, which on that schedule was pretty sketchy anyway. But no, we did get them out there. There was an armourer, there was cohorts supplied the arms, so they're like BAPTI, they're one of the bigger armourers. And we took the 5.0s out there. I don't know if you saw it, we tried to make the Brownings jam deliberately a bit because there was this thing going on. I don't know if they mentioned the. I think they did mention them. There was a bad batch of Russian, Pakistani ammo used by, and that was about 2008-9. So I made that point that they got the bad batch of ammo ramming it into the breaches and it messed up. But no, that wasn't too bad. We got it all out there in the end, and But the guys hadn't married up with the weapons before they got to the country. So they had to do a lot of catching up with the weapons training when we got.
That was another question I was going to ask you. Was obviously a lot of big films since Platoon have done boot camps. Yeah, is that something you did with the guys just to get them, to look right with the equipment?
Yeah, so we took them on I think it was 48-hour trip up to Wales, and were mean to them for a bit. Not too bad, but like just to kind of
Give
get
them the
that.
whole Brecon treatment, right?
Sorry.
Give them the whole Brecon treatment.
Yeah, I mean, there's some legendary boot camps. I think Platoon's got to be one of the better ones I've ever heard of, which sounds horrific. And actually, I know that they sprung from the boot camp to the opening scene of that film. Someone told me that on another podcast, actually. It's like, so they literally came out of the boot camp, were told they were going to stand down, went and had a few beers, and they got woken up at 3:00 in the morning and sent into the jungle to act out the first scene, which is method acting. But I did do quite a lot of that. I did quite a lot of, I don't know if you ever get the guys, it's like, I did make them walk a lot, and I did make them patrol a lot, and I didn't tell them what was going on, and there was this big thing about accommodation, which was, the oasis was sort of a beautiful oasis, and one side there was like a couple of huts, and the other side was like a proper eco village. And the cast didn't suss out for about a week that we were in the eco village and they were in these two huts all like crammed in together, sweaty, and I don't know whether that was the right thing to do to them. It was method, but
You mentioned earlier that you broke for lunch.
Yeah.
Was it hard to get the guys back into the mindset of being in Afghanistan when you came back for that second session of shooting per day?
A bit, but you know what? That's kind of what being an operations is like. There's a lot of it's downtime, just sleeping, and then suddenly someone wakes up and goes, "Oh, can you go and do this?" It's like that's what happens. It's like that's the real thing. But yeah, performance-wise, they just got into a really good groove. I felt like, because the thing about actors, and they were all really young and really enthusiastic, they practiced their weapons drills. They had a competition about weapons drills when they were in camp. They'd be stripping the weapons down. They got faster, I shouldn't say this, but they did get faster than the veterans who went with us. They had competitions for money. And there was a point, and I shot it actually. They were up on a hill doing something. I said, "Stu, let's turn over." They're walking over that hill looking actually like you can believe that is a real unit. And that wasn't directed. They just went up there and started doing all the drills, the right step, because we tried to get them to the right separation. Because one thing that's always been on war movies, everyone's always really bunched up, like that, and you just wouldn't be like that. So I made them spread out and try and do something approaching the drills. Yeah,
I love all that sort of desert DPM look. You've got the chest rigs, the SE80s with the one's got a UGL on it. I really like that. But one thing that I think stands out for me in the alley tally this week, it's just the amount of SA-80 bashing that goes on in this movie. It's absolutely incredible. And I've written down one of my favourite exchanges where he goes, he's moaning about the SA-80, and the lieutenant pipes up from one of the Wemmicks in just out of shot. He goes, "Actually, the A2 is an improved weapon." And Smudge goes, "Well, if it's so
significantly improved weapon.
Significantly improved. And Smudge goes, "Well, if it's so good, name me any other army that uses it." And that I just chuckle every time I hear that, because me and Matt, we chat often about the SE-80 and its tumultuous period of service. We think, well, no one actually does use this weapon other than the British Army.
Jamaican Defence Force.
Jamaican Defence, that's such a funny line.
Yeah,
Matt's
the Bolivians.
Yeah.
Must be a few long around the place.
Yeah. Does that come from your experience of using the weapon, or where's that come from?
It's just not the best weapon, is it? Give me personally anything else. I mean, go through this. I started out. I'm old enough to start out with SLR. That was all right. That was a bit of an elephant gun, but you could stop an elephant with that. I like things like the Bren gun. I remember the Bren gun when I was a cadet. I had a Bren gun. That was a bloody good weapon. And then Browning's a good weapon. M16's a great weapon. But the S80, I just remember being issued it, and people used to run into trees, and then they had, because the magazine releases on the outside, simple things that you wouldn't. Yeah, magazine releases on the outside. You run into a tree, your magazine drips off. That's the last thing you're going to want. It's like, yeah. Anyway, it's a design. Yeah. You guys probably know more about its history. Right?
It's just funny because you hear a lot of that time where people were complaining about the equipment they had. I remember it being in the news.
Yeah. I remember a big Guardian editorial
piece about it. Yeah,
about it. Yeah.
I remember a guy I was in Sabre Sales, if you remember that big military shop in Portsmouth. And there was a guy serving in there, probably about 2009, 2010. And he was like, "Oh, I'm buying extra magazine pouches and extra water bottles because I did my first tour and I had one. Like I had enough for like one water bottle and stuff like that." And he was saying how, interesting it was. And I think, for him to be so brazen about that at the time is quite telling. But I kind of like the moaningness of it. It's very accurate.
That's what it is. And also everyone got. I remember there was that big shop down East London, Silverman's. Do you remember Silverman's?
Yeah, so still going.
Boots. Like if you want a pair of boots, you went to Silverman's because that was the only place you get a pair of boots that actually wouldn't wear out, fall apart on, And also before Gore-Tex was issued, that was my day. We didn't have Gore-Tex. You could get Gore-Tex, Civi Gore-Tex, and they did it in camouflage. That's what we went to buy, because everything issued to you was not terribly good as it was.
Yeah. So where did you get the Wemmixes from? Were they in country? Did you have to ship them in?
No, but they got left there. They never made it out. They never made it. I want to know what's happened to them, actually. Last time I saw them, they were sitting in Marrakesh airport. I went there on holiday, and they broke down, and we couldn't get them out. They were on a carnet. So then basically they got signed over to customs, and they just sat there, and then they were gone. So someone out there's, probably a surf company is operating them as a...
Perhaps they're in a museum.
No, we shipped them. I drove and then shipped them. The guys... one of the guys had been in I think it was the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, one of them, and they teamed up, two of them, and they brought them out with a load of kit. They brought out a load of surplus kit, so the uniforms, spare uniforms, all that. They went out via Spain. Can you imagine that? Camouflage vehicles.
So did you buy them off the surplus market for the film? Is that what you did?
He owned them, and we rented them off him, and so the deal paid him.
Because they look the business, they look really good.
They look perfect.
Welded them up. They're just long wheelbase Land Rover. He welded them up. They look spectacular. And obviously, you actually got the mounts for the Brownings and stuff because they needed that. And they look great.
No, they really do. It reminded me a lot of certain sections of the movie when they're driving around in them and they're engaging at these incredibly long distances. And you can't see what they're hitting. Reminded me of I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's a Sky documentary from about 2007 called Pathfinders. And it really, really reminded me of that. I think it was the first big documentary that showed it was the Jackal had just come out, and it was about these guys using the Jackal. And it really reminded me of that, just the engagement distances, the guys just firing blindly at anything if they're getting any contact back. It's just a really, really strong element of the movie for me.
It was something that I thought, because if you think about, so the range of the Browning is like 1/800 or something. It's like the engagement ranges are long. You don't want to get too close if you can help it.
No, of course not.
And then also the other thing is this thing where it's that war movie cliche where they see the enemy creeping up. When you're in contact, then nobody sees anything. All you hear is, and if it's in a built-up area, you just hear the echoes. So I wanted to portray that kind of chaos of. And I got criticised. I remember people asking me in QAs, why can't I see the enemy? Well, you won't. That's it. Unless something jumps out right in front of you, you're not going to see them. That's not going to be the thing.
Well, for me, that's one of the stronger elements of the movie. Sorry, just quickly, it's one for me one of the stronger elements of the movie that you don't see the enemy. Like everything I've seen or read about Afghanistan, or had friends that were out there, they were like, well, we'd get engaged at whatever distance, and we call in fast air. Like we wouldn't try and sacrifice ourselves if we could help it.
Then you see those guys who are unarmed, the twitchers on the bikes and stuff. You see the people are spotters who are they're unarmed, so you can't do anything about them because the rules of engagement with that is you can't deal with those in any way.
Yeah, but that's why I like the movie, though. It feels true in its representation.
Yeah,
what were you saying? Sorry,
it's fiction, but it's true.
Yeah, of course. Go on, Matt. Sorry, I interrupted you, Matt.
I was just going to say it's that whole unseen enemy, technique of it, you can't see the enemy. It's a strong filmmaking tool as well as being true to reality. It works really well because the guys are engaging, but you can't see anyone firing back. What I really did like in terms of authenticity was that crack of incoming fire over them, which a lot of films completely don't do because they have no idea of that's what a bullet coming towards you sounds like.
Yeah, so we tried recording it for real, putting bullets over a mic, and it topped out flatline. So then we used a whip, and we smacked it into a table several times, and that gave us the crack. Because that's the thing is, like, if you've never been shot at, you don't know that sound. So then you make these other sounds, which are and no, it's a crack. The crack is what you hear. So like, I really wanted to try and when we put it in the cinema, we took some veterans, put them in the cinema, and we put them in a big Dolby 7 speaker surround, and that went around the cinema at the back, and they went, oh, you could see that went. We did work at that actually, that sound effect.
Yeah, the sound is another really
really
strong
adds
element.
to
It really does.
I really liked the little splicing of the Apache gun camera that takes out the other Wimmick. I thought that was a really nice little thing to include. I thought that worked really well.
We've got some. Yeah, the biggest thing about that was like that cliche. The explosion's so big they shot it 7 times. It was literally like that. We rolled both cameras, right, and there was this brilliant FXX guy I work out with called O'Connor. He's Irish. He's from Spain. Irish explosives expert. There you go. Anyway, he's amazing. Worked with the locals, and our explosive wasn't really apparently very good. It was quite like low grade, and he just spent the day prepping that shot with like little, water bottles, plastic water bottles, cutting the lids off them, inverting. And they dug it all in. We knew pretty much we had enough exposed to get one good hit. And he said, "Where do you want to shoot it?" And I went, "We're going to do it over the shoulder from above, like that." And we covered it as well from the side with the camera hitting the wall. But to do your main shot over the shoulder, then go, have I made a terrible mistake? Should we have just locked it off really close and just made sure we catch it? But it worked really well. I loved it, and I thought that actually, from my like directing point of view, was one of my happy moments in the film. Yeah, that it came off.
Yeah, that was great. It looks fantastic.
Whole ambush sequence is really good.
Really good. Yeah, being hit with the IED as well. It just out of the blue. You're not expecting it. Again, like fiction but true. Really like that. Really think it's strong. So talking about strong things in the movie, maybe we should move on to favourite scenes.
Hello there, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to let you know that you can now join our supporting cast over on Patreon. As thanks for your support, you'll be able to help us pick films, submit questions for guests, have first pick on brand new and exclusive merch, and much more. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
Matt, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, as I said there, that the ambush sequence is really good. But what obviously stands out for me was a lot of the interpersonal scenes, and I really loved about the film all of the frictions between the guys and the various different layers of it. So you've got the class element of the squaddies, the working class guy, and the Ruperts, the officers. And then you've also got the intermix of units. So you've got a TA guy, you've got a Royal Marine Commando who is sort of been attached to them because he missed his unit's tour. And you get all these interesting interpersonal sort of frictions and clashes. And initially they're just banter, but as the 2-day patrol goes into a 2-week patrol, everything gets more serious and everyone's more tense and everyone's jarring off one another. And I loved some of the dialogue you had in there, but just picking a few lines out when I was watching it earlier. Rob's already mentioned the SA-80 slander that goes on in the film, but there's a great line where I think it's the lieutenant. It says, "Private Smith, would you please stop slagging off the equipment?" It's just such a nice little line. And there's the bit where they talk about borrowing some 50 caliber ammunition off the ANA, the Afghan National Army, and he says, "Now we're borrowing ammo off people we came here to save," essentially. Yeah, there's these little lines that I really liked out of the script, and I a lot of that reminds me of those older British war movies where a lot happens in the dialogue. It's not always action. It's often about interpersonal relationships and the way characters sort of interact and develop. And I think the film does that really well.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But yeah, they're my favorite parts.
There's a good, because I wanted to show, because often I think that, again, is a war movie cliche where the unit goes there, they take some casualties, but they're all strong and they all finish well together. But go figure, if you're under that much pressure, that may not be the way. And it's been my experience that sometimes that isn't the way that goes, and the frictions really blow up. People that end up having fights over stuff. And there was a Norman Mailer book called Naked and the Dead, there you go, Southern Pacific, really good book, covered a patrol walking through the jungle where they all fall apart. That's a common kind of thing. That's a kind of real life scenario. And I just wanted to, I probably pushed it a bit, but I wanted to portray that kind of how those interplays all lead to conflict. And the more and more the pressure grows, and the more and more, things go wrong, people get hurt, the more that can blow up. And then how hard it is, obviously, the officers try and keep it on the rails.
It really reminded me of those elements that Matt was talking about, like the friction and the sort of it just all builds. It really reminded me of Battleground and Attack. We did recently on the show. We did Battleground a few years ago, but these are movies where men aren't just there to shoot at Jerry's and run about a bit. They're actually having way more to say on their actual situation. And that's where the movie for me is unique, because a lot of those British war film classics of the 50s and 60s, they don't really get into that very much. The Cruel Sea does a little bit. Something like Nine Men does a little bit, but not really at a personal level like this film. And I think another thing one of the things I love about this movie is you have a death really early on. Taff gets hit, but it's not dwelled upon like it would be in another film or someone else's take, because for people who haven't seen it, Taff gets hit and it looks like it goes through his body armor. You later learn that it hits him at the side and he's evacuated, but you don't learn of his death until later on in the movie, and his death leads to it's the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah.
And that's just a very strong thing, because now the guys have this, they were angry at the fact he was hurt, but they now are extremely angry because they blame the officer class for him being killed, when it's not that at all. But it's just that whole these personal relationships, the banter will get them through. But when there's not, it's like Taff was the main banterer, and Smudge just sort of is really affected by that. I really think that's a strong part of the movie. It's much more of an interpersonal type war film than it is an actioner, and I really appreciate that. Yeah,
definitely. That's what I wanted, and I was trying to show, because as an officer, you have to stand there. If the policy's a mess, right, and you're in a situation like that, and the policy clearly for them is a mess, you still got to front up the policy. You can't turn around and go like, oh well, we'll just pack up and leave, or whatever you would want to do. But I was trying to show that just because you've got a uniform on doesn't dehumanize you. Just because you're in the military, you're still a human being. You've still got all the same motivations all of us have, all the same emotions. Everything's going to be the same. You're just in a very pressured situation.
I think that's there's another thing where it just stands it apart, because there aren't many war films. Well, there are obviously war films that do this, but not often than not, your bigger Hollywood movies don't really get that level of it. They might hint at it, but when you do an independent production like this, you've got way more scope. You haven't got a studio saying, look, we need more action. There's no, you haven't had an explosion for 10 minutes. What the hell are you doing? You've got the opportunity.
You would, if it was a big commercial film, you would not get away with that. No, you get a bit of it. You get Saving Private Ryan where they're sitting around the campfire playing the record for 5 minutes or a minute, and then they're gone. And that's as close as you wouldn't get it. I did think that what's the one, Band of Brothers TV series? I thought they did quite good stuff. There's a bit of that in that. Trying to think of it,
But I also have this theory, and I was going to ask you about it. So when the men are out in the open, they're very professional soldiers, and they have this outward look of, doing the drills, patrolling, driving around in the Wemmixes. And then when they're inside in the compound, they have these outbursts, they have the banter, they have complaining about kit. Was that a narrative choice for you to have? When they're out in the open, they present themselves. When they're inside, they're in, and they can talk about their inner thoughts. And I'm probably being a bit theatrical about it, but
no, that's exactly because it's they're highly professional. They're members of the British. They're highly professional. They're never going to let anything get in the way of the job. The job comes first. But away from the job, when you have that downtime, when there's somewhere relatively safe, then that's when things get expressed that aren't being expressed. And you can't stop in the middle of a patrol and have a bust up about something. That's not.
No, of course not.
And it never would really happen, I think. So yes, that is exactly a narrative choice, and I think it's quite a real choice. Yeah.
No, it was really strong.
Is there a specific scene that stands out for you that you're really fond of or proud of?
I think a lot of the experiences were kind of based on my own own experiences. And there's the one where where the officer has to break the news to Taff, which is something about Taff's death, and I'd have to do that myself to my men. Right. And that's I like that scene. I don't know what happened in that scene, but I remember. I don't know if they're going to hate me for this. Some people burst into tears they were watching it from by that tree. I don't know, the sunlight. I don't know how well it comes across in the film, but it was an evening shot, sun. It was just very moving. And, you felt and Ben delivered the lines. I think we did it in one take or two takes or something, and then just went, that's okay. We're not going to do it. I was supposed to cut around and do a face shot and forget that. We're going to print that. That's good. So that scene was quite moving for me. Yeah.
It is very affecting because you get the two officers. One doesn't want to tell the men because he knows it's going to break them. But the other officer's like, we can't not tell them because if they find out, it's going to be worse.
If they're over the net, then they'll be really angry.
So when you know someone's been hurt or dead, if you know someone's dead, and there's lots of different, in the military, there's lots of different networks of radios. So it depends which network it's come over. So in that case, I sort of portrayed the reality that it came over on a higher formation net, so only the officers have that information. If there was a watchkeeper there, he might have got it as well, but I didn't bother with that semantics. But that might spread somewhere else down the networks, and then eventually someone would find out, and that probably would be worse. If people have found out that everyone knew and you didn't know, then that would be worse. I think that was the point the character Ben plays is making. It's like,
it comes across,
And it gives the characters way more agency and a chance to react to something rather than having them hear it secondhand, which is, and it allows their characters to develop and actually take it on board. So maybe we should ease into final thoughts like we usually do. Oh, no, but before we do, we should actually do our listener question for this week. So Brian Williams, one of our Patreons, if you're not a Fighting on Film Patreon member, this is one of the perks that you get when we have guests on like Tom. You can ask them questions. And he asks, how important was it that the soldiers were seen to talk as soldiers and not as actors playing soldiers, which you often see in films?
Yes, I wanted the dialogue to I wanted those characters to be believable to people who'd served in the military. I don't. What I think about this film is that it's not accurate in terms of like any. I think if you've been an Afghan vet, you look at it and go, "Oh, there's all sorts of things wrong with this film." There are loads. It's not because it's fiction, but I wanted people who'd served in the military to recognise those characters, like I say, the NAV, and for them to talk. And again, probably wouldn't have got away with so much of it on a bigger production. Like sometimes Stu, my DOP, generally go, "What are they talking about now?" I said, "Never mind, Stu. It'll come out in the wash. People either understand roughly what they're saying, but maybe the emotion will come out or whatever." Because I wanted them to speak in the language they would have spoken in, and also it's sometimes quite rude. It's kind of like on the nose. That's how it is. That's how people talk in the military.
And I like the fact that the officers use a lot more jargon than the men do. The men are just very more straight with how they're talking. The officers are saying the jargon. Because sometimes when the officers are talking, I was like, I don't know this abbreviation, but it made complete sense for these guys to be saying it, which is really nice. So, final thoughts, chaps, for this week.
I've got a couple of questions that fit in nicely with final thoughts. Obviously, with the film, you wanted to spark a conversation about British Army's preparedness for counter-insurgency campaign like this. Do you think the film helped start that conversation? And do you think it's a conversation around preparedness that we still need to be having?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I would be very arrogant to say this sparked the conversation. I think I might have been one of the very early people to put my head over the parapet and say this is not working. The key thing about an insurgency is it really isn't a military operation; it's a political thing. And if you can't provide an alternative narrative to insurgents, which we weren't doing, they're going to win. But yet, when the Taliban took Kabul, people were still surprised. So my narrative didn't carry that far. It was obvious to me they were going to win. So I don't know. And then the bit about preparedness. The army is very small now. We've just given quite a large amount of our armored fleet to Ukraine. There is a thing there where we as a country do need. If you're going to have a military and you're going to send them places, you need to spend the money. You do. There's no question about it. If they have to make do with stuff that doesn't work or equipment second rate, that's just not fair on them. I think I've always felt that. I do think that. I think there is a conversation now to have. This is a very political topic about what exactly we want our military to do, because you've got to pay for them to do things. You've got to pay for their equipment if you want them to go places and do things, or not. But then don't expect them to be able to do stuff.
Yeah, give them the tools. That old quote.
My other question. My other question was: have you had any feedback from veterans of Afghanistan, and what do they think about the film, and do they think it's an accurate representation? that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the feedback I got was a lot of it was negative. A lot of it was negative. Honestly, I did a screening to veterans. A lot of them recognised the problem, but like I was in other campaigns, and the trouble with coming out of a campaign is you don't really want someone to tell you that was a waste of time. That's not what you want. It's not what I'm saying. That's kind of not what I'm saying, but you know what I mean. And that's a tough call for anyone. You know, people lost their limbs, people lost their lives. You know, it's a tragedy, and no lives wasted. I mean, I'm not saying they wasted their lives. It's just that is a really tough thing to take on board, and a lot of people are still living with that pain. You know, I think that's why that conversation for us in Britain was hard to have, because we never got, like, if you take something like the Vietnam War, there was a crossroads where that became massively publicly unpopular, but we never did that, because in Britain I think we very much support our armed forces. You know, we've got a good ethos in this country, but just because you're supporting armed forces does not mean you have to support the government policy. But those two things were intertwined in Afghanistan, and nobody was able to the media were not able to get themselves across that Rubicon and separate the two issues. So but then I had other veterans who went, bloody hell, that was accurate. So, you know, I don't know. It also depends on the experience.
I suppose another thing with Afghanistan. Another thing with Afghanistan is it was such a long conflict. Exactly. Everyone's experience of it evolved. So people that were there in 2006 did not have the same experience as people that were in 2011, 2012, 2019. And if you take the patrol and you think, I wrote that in 2009, so those patrols, that's representing 2008, or right at the beginning, it's really ancient history by the time you get to the end of the conflict. The kit they were using at the end and the kit they're using is completely different, you know, even, everything. Yeah. So,
Yeah, 100%.
There's a DPMs out. You've got the A2 SAATs have got the urgent operation requirement with the nice new fore ends, and various bits of kit have been added, and they're in jackals rather than snatches and stuff.
I really enjoy this movie. First time I watched it was a couple of years ago. I think it was just as we started doing Final Film, and me and Matt would go off and scurry away on the internet looking for, like, you know, independent, rare, obscure war films. And this popped up and I watched it and I was like, Matt, we have to do this. We must do this movie. It's such an interesting film. And it's in that mold of really strong British films that say a lot more than just what is on screen. You know, your dialogue's very enriching. You've got a great cast who've gone on to do some, you know, very good things. You know, you yourself, you're coming off of being in the army. You're using your own experience, things like that. There aren't many films like this, is what I'm trying to say. And I just really think it's fantastic. And I would implore anyone who hasn't seen it to go and see it. You know, there's conflict between NCOs and men, the minimal soundtrack, but when the soundtrack comes in, it's really moody. You know, the whole thing about being inside and outside, the just everything about it, as Matt would say, the mise en scène is fantastic. There's something here. Yeah. And I really do think it's a triumph. I think should be very, very proud of it.
Thanks.
I love the way that you approached it with the vignettes of various different experiences within the patrol, and then you had that overarching conversation between the captain and the judge advocate, which I believe was played by yourself.
Played by me. I voiced voiceover, it, and then we never did. That's
well, it works really well.
Well,
I really like.
We made that.
And that's another strong thing about the movie. There is that little overarching thing about the post part of it, and I wonder, should there have been a scene at the end where it shows him talking to him? And I was like, no, I actually like the fact it just ends with them leaving. I think that's nice. That's all you need.
Also, someone said, like, was I interrogating my own movie? Like, it's really existential. I'm talking to one of the cast. Where have we gone here? Like, it's
very good. I like it. So my final question really would be, do you have any plans for a follow-up movie? Is there anything in the works?
I do actually. We went into lockdown. I don't know if you know, I'm going to advertise my book. Can I advertise my book on the podcast?
Of course, I was just about to mention your book, but of course you can.
Anyway, so we went into lockdown. So basically what happened was I had another project on the pipeline about the Battle of Mirbat. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Amazing.
Oh, yes, that would
be a good film, wouldn't it? That would be a good film.
Episodes where we've talked about what would make a great war movie, and Mirbat always comes up.
Yeah, so we got quite a long way down the road with that. We were actually at the Berlin Film Festival, February 2020, when everyone started going, I don't feel very well, I've got a bit of a chest infection. And I went, I'll probably get over it. No. So that kiboshed that particular production. And and I'm actually getting it fired back up. So hopefully, next couple of years, that will be the thing, and that'll come out, and that'll be
fantastic.
Yeah.
And it'll be, it's the same sort of territory. It's very much a boiler room story, kind of small unit, which is what I do, isn't it? Small unit stuck in the middle of nowhere.
If you need any extras just in the background fire an SLR, me and Matt there.
You come out to a special, we're bound to shoot them. Come out to a special.
I'd love to.
Sit on set, and you can go and look at the kit. Huey's and there'll be Brownings in it. Browning 5.0s, always. That'd
be fantastic. So yeah, I thought, talking about your recent book, Speed, Aggression, Surprise: The Untold Story of the SAS.
Yeah.
Is there anything? I mean, that book's been amazingly well received. Have you got any plans of turning that into something? I know Rogue Heroes has come out.
Rogue Heroes kind of done it, haven't they? So I was writing that, the definitive account of the origins of the SS, and then I found out that Kudos and BBC were making it. I went, right, okay. But so that's going to be like a bigger budget. But actually, to be honest, when it's come out, I'm quite relieved because they didn't cover Dudley Clark. So my main character, if you've read it, is like Dudley Clark. At least half the book covers.
Yeah, he's fascinating.
The Dominic West character in the thing, who I think slightly steals the show of the whole because it just knocks it out of the park, doesn't it? It's slightly. And the true thing is, Dudley Clark was a kind of Machiavellian cross-dresser, this very maverick army officer in his 40s who, he created the Commandos, the US Rangers, SAS, CIA. You could probably credit him with that because he spoke to Wild Bill Donovan, who was the American attaché when he came to Cairo. So, I think there's a thing there. To be honest, the book's done. The book came out of COVID because I couldn't do any filming, so I wrote a book. I said to my wife, it's timing to write a book. It's now. I wrote it, so I've done it. But yeah, I think there might be something there. I don't know what it would be. I don't know. I mean, it would be the Dominic West character. I think you'd do it from that point of view. You do.
Yeah.
That'd be
his
fast.
Character would make a fantastic series of its own, definitely.
Yeah, because it's almost got like a feel. Those old films. There's a scene. Spoiler alert for my book. There's a scene where he goes to Norway in a bloody old Clipper airliner, and they chuck him out in the fjord in a blown up rubber dinghy, and then they leave him there. And it's almost like this very old. Yeah, this feels like a 50s war movie where you go, "What is going on? This is nuts. This can't be a true story. Like, how is this happening?"
Like something like I Was Monty's Double or. Something like that.
I Was Monty's Double was his story. He cast the character. That was his idea. It's his idea. He watched. What film is it? Is it Two Something's Past Cairo? Foxhole in Cairo? One of those ones. Might either be Foxhole. I don't think it's Foxhole. It's one of those ones. He was sitting in a cinema in Italy, and he saw this guy walk on playing a Royal Tanks officer. And went, that guy looks like Montgomery, and he made a note of it. And he thought, when the Normandy lands, he said, we could fake that guy. And the saddest thing about Clark, he never got to write his own story. So all this stuff came out. Operation Mincemeat, which was he had a bigger plan than that. These are all his stories. He never got to do it himself because he was bound by the official secrets. So yeah, definitely something there.
Wow.
Something there.
Brilliant. Yeah. I really hope you get something done on that one.
Yeah,
but no, I mean,
yeah.
To wrap up, thank you so much for joining us, Tom. It's been so eye-opening and amazing talking to you about your film. And again. Yeah, listeners, if you haven't watched it, it's out there. It's easily findable. Please watch it and drop
Amazon Prime right now. There's no excuse.
Yeah, and I encourage all the directors get on here. Directors and producers get on here because that's good, isn't it? If you get like other directors, you should get on it. It's a great podcast. I find it really interesting. Yeah,
it's that half the battle is finding industry people that want to come on and they're not busy. That's half the problem.
Well, I'll find some. I'll find some for you.
Well, please do. Watch this space, folks. Yeah. Watch this space. So, as always, thanks for listening once again, everyone. And you can find the rest of the show on fightingonfilm.com. Start from episode 1, have a FOC binge, and we will catch you next time. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yes, that was brilliant, guys. Thank you very much. Take care.
Really fantastic. Thanks, Tom.